Miles Taylor is a lifelong Republican who spent years working on Capitol Hill and then in President Trump's Department of Homeland Security from 2017 to 2019, including as chief of staff. He left the administration and is now speaking out about President Trump's leadership. Taylor has said the president has governed by whim, political calculation, and self-interest, and that we are less safe because of the president's actions. Miles, thanks for being here.
Jessica, thanks for having me, and I stand by those words, and hopefully we'll go a little further beyond that today.
I really want to dig into it because, there are a lot of people who hear that, Miles, and think, what, President Trump's unusual. So it's not surprising he has an unusual leadership style. Can you give us a story that encapsulates for you what the experience is like to work for him?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say this up front. I would be skeptical of me if I was watching someone like me come on TV. We're in the heat of an election. Then an individual who served for 2.5 years in the Trump administration comes out against the president, right? Easy to say this is a deep state plot or this guy's a secret Democrat or any of those things. So, full disclosure, I'm a lifelong Republican. And I went into this administration really wanting to try to help the president succeed. It was obvious he had flaws. Anyone who says he doesn't have flaws is either trying to impress him or is trying to avoid getting fired, right? But people saw that. But as a Republican, I really wanted to see the policies that we've fought so long for succeed. And I thought that there was a chance the office would be sobering for Donald Trump. It wasn't, right? So I'll give you an example to your question. Year two of the administration, I think it was December of 2018, we go into the Oval Office to brief the president. And I've talked a little bit about this before, but maybe not in so much detail. We go in to brief the president on the recommendations we had developed with the Department of Education over many, many months on school safety, right? Our focus was this: stop American school children from being murdered in their classrooms in the wake of Sandy Hook, in the wake of what we saw in Parkland. This was a very sobering endeavor, and it was actually sort of a one of its kind initiative in the administration. We had a lot of departments working on this. And in DHS, we had the US Secret Service focused on everything they know about profiling shooters and how we could use that to help keep schools safe. Okay, so we're walking into the Oval Office with these stories of parents who've lost their children in our hands to brief the president and say, look, you're going to be meeting with these families, and here are the recommendations we've developed to try to keep this from ever happening again. Within about a minute and a half of entering the Oval Office to talk to the president about this, he became totally distracted. He was disinterested, and as always in the Oval Office, people were coming in and out, and people who shouldn't have been in the meeting. And what was supposed to be this sobering, maybe even emotive moment to walk through this and talk about the gravity was instead a sort of irreverent exercise in the president jumping from one topic to the other. And the topic, of course, he landed on because we were in front of him, and he was used to seeing his Homeland Security officials and saying, let's talk about immigration, is we landed on the wall. And the president had designs that day for the wall in his head that he wanted to share with us. He said, I want you to go back to the office after this and really, let's just make this the most beautiful thing. His quote was, a beautiful work of art. And I'm just sort of jarred sitting there because literally on my paper was photo, bio of children who've been killed, their families that he's going to meet with. And he doesn't want to pay attention to any of that, right? He had no interest in that. He'd rather, again, for the millionth time, talk about how he wanted us to design and paint and sculpture his border wall to be a thing of beauty. That was really disturbing. The worst thing I've seen him do, far and away, no. But an example of what it's like to try to keep this guy focused on his job, absolutely.
Is there an example of the worst thing you've seen him do?
Yeah, well, I've talked about that a bit publicly. I mean, the thing that was the proximate cause for me quitting my job was the president at the border offering to pardon a Homeland Security official for breaking the law. So he really wanted us to break the law by not letting anyone else in across the southern border. And for the listeners who don't know, look, there's US laws that require we accept people who seek refuge in the United States if they meet the criteria. So if they're fleeing violence and persecution from a country, where they may suffer, like let's say Iran, for instance, where they may have been tortured and they could be a political dissident. We have a process to allow them to become a part of our great experiment in freedom, the United States. And he said, I don't even care about those people. I don't want anyone else in. And the president was told, sir, that wouldn't be legal. And he said, I don't care. If you get in trouble with the law, I'll pardon you. To me, if that in and of itself wasn't illegal, it was completely immoral and unethical for the president to do that. And look, the secretary and I flew back from the border that night, and I just said, this is it. We're done. We got to get out of here. We've stopped being able to do good and to help him stay on the right path. And it's time for someone else to step up.
For people watching this who might wonder about motives, you have endorsed Joe Biden. You're advocating for his election. Why are you doing that?
Yeah, look, it's not really easy. I'm a lifelong conservative, as I said. My bookshelf back here is packed with all kinds of stuff that Democrats would just hate. You know, Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and, Irving Kristol and things they wouldn't love. I'm a conservative through and through. But at the end of the day, I think as a conservative, the thing I should care about most, and I think this about the other side politically, is what's the character of the person at the end of the day? Is this someone who will operate with integrity? And I would rather work with or for someone who follows their principles, even if they're principles I might not agree with, than someone who has no principles at all. And I don't say that lightly. And in the course of working for Donald Trump, it became very clear that his only moral code was his self-interest. That bears repeating. The president of the United States' only moral code is his self-interest. That's not just me, a jaded Trump appointee, saying this. This is cabinet secretaries who've left the administration. This is people who are in the administration who would endorse exactly what I have just said. And so I think that's the concern. And so for me, this is a character election, and I think Joe Biden will be a man of character. I'll probably oppose him on day 2 on some of his biggest policy issues, but that's okay, because we need a steady hand hovering above the nuclear button rather than one that wants to press the button as many times as possible anytime something goes wrong.
I want to ask you about a couple specific issues that you've commented on and that are in the news right now. On immigration, you've talked publicly before about the child separation policy. Currently, right now, today, as we speak, there are about 600 migrant children who are being held in hotels, so seemingly in violation of something called the Flores Agreement, by contractors. And Chad Wolf, who currently runs DHS, says that that's a long-standing practice of DHS that goes back decades. I asked Michael Chertoff if that's a long-standing practice of DHS. He didn't recall it. Is this something that DHS routinely does, holds kids alone in hotels, and does it concern you?
Well, I can't speak to that specifically right now because I don't know the mechanics of what they're dealing with. What I can say is, and I've got a lot of criticisms about how these immigration policies have been handled in this administration. One thing that really is important to note, though, is there's a huge role for Congress here. Congress has sort of abdicated their role. The numbers at the border are enormous. And it really comes down to an issue of where can you safely put children who come across? And frankly, the Department of Homeland Security, whether it was under the Obama administration or this administration or the next one, hasn't been given the resources to do that in a way that's adequate. And so you're in a tough position because you have these border officers who, when a child arrives, the answer isn't just let them run into the desert in the United States and put their lives at risk. You have to have some sort of humane process to place them with a family, but that means you also have somewhere for them to sleep. And a border patrol station is the wrong place. If you've been down to these, it's concrete slabs. It's not a place for a child to be. So big role for Congress there. But importantly, another problem is this administration has undertaken actions like on family separation that were ill-considered, rash, and rushed through the system before the consequences could be considered. And the result is damning. We had children that for weeks were separated from their parents that should have been reunited within days, if not hours. And they weren't because the administration and people at the White House refused to listen. Now, I know that viewers and listeners have probably a skeptical picture, both of me, of my former boss, Kirstjen Nielsen, but that's because at the time, we didn't all rush to the cameras to showboat about how heroic we were being behind the scenes. But what was happening behind the scenes was you had a Justice Department that said, we've decided we're prosecuting everyone that comes across, and a White House that said, DHS, you better implement this or you're in deep trouble. And we dragged our feet for weeks and said, you guys need to listen. This is going to be a disaster. And they said, we're going to take a vote. And our own agencies within DHS, and I won't name names, but people in our own agencies that were Trump appointees said, don't worry, we have the resources. You guys are complaining for nothing. You're hyperventilating. They took a vote. Kirstjen Nielsen was the only one who didn't raise her hand, and she said, we're not ready to do this. The administration implemented the policy anyway. She was right. It was a predictable disaster. And fortunately, we got the president to sign an executive order to end it. But the dilemma, of course, is, as I've said publicly, the president every single month after that said, I want to turn family separation back on, and I want to make it crueler by just ripping any kid apart from their parent indefinitely.
That's what I wanted to ask. The separation, there's the separation itself, and then there's the fact that it was implemented in such a way that some kids are no longer connected to the number that attaches them to their parent, like they're
Yeah.
lost in the system. And I wonder,
Yeah.
is the fact these kids were lost in the system a function of incompetence? They just didn't hand it
Yeah.
off, or malicious intent because the White House wanted to punish families that cross the
Yeah.
border?
Incompetence, but it would have been malicious intent, because what a lot of people don't know is in year one, the White House said to us they wanted a deliberate policy of just take the kid from the parent as a way to scare migrants from coming to the border. John Kelly and Kirstjen Nielsen said that is disgusting. We will never do that. So what the White House fell back on was telling the Justice Department, fine, let's prosecute every adult that crosses illegally. And by prosecuting them, we can deport them more quickly. Now, if you had small numbers coming across, that would be fine, because the parent goes away, gets prosecuted for a day, comes back. That's what happens in the system today. If you got picked up today, Jessica, for breaking the law, you wouldn't be able to bring kids with you into jail, right? Because we don't bring kids to jail. But you would expect that the justice system would work swiftly enough that they'd be reunited. That happened during the Obama administration. It happens today. What they didn't consider was, because thousands of people are crossing every day, there's literally not enough vans and judges and lawyers to do this process swiftly enough to just make sure parents and kids are reunited at the end of that judicial proceeding, regardless of what the ending of that proceeding is. Maybe the judge says, yes, you could just stay in the United States. Maybe they say you go home. Either way, you're back with your child again. They didn't foresee how bad that backlog would be. We did. And unfortunately, the policy went forward. I wish we had done more. I mean, I wish we'd laid on the train tracks and screamed to the rafters. But when our own agencies were telling us, no, trust us, it's going to be okay, there's kind of nothing you can do. You've got to trust the people that are talking to you. But I'll tell you what, it was one of the biggest mistakes this administration made.
And do you regret not quitting over that? I've heard you say something to that effect.
I really wish that I had left in 2018. I think it would have made a bigger impact. And for a number of reasons, I stayed longer. There were some spookier things that we were worried about happening. In particular, we knew who the president wanted to appoint as Homeland Security Secretary if the secretary and I left. And we didn't think those individuals were even remotely capable of speaking truth to power. We thought they would be a rubber stamp for the president. And at least for me, that was a reason to stay a little while longer.
Let's talk about the person who is in that job right now. Chad Wolf is running DHS. He was not Senate confirmed. The GAO has said he is ineligible to serve. That's a whole conversation in itself. Today, he said on Fox News, though, that law enforcement is working on getting Black Lives Matter leaders arrested. Do you read that as tough talk, or is that a possible real abuse of power?
So let me say one thing up front. I've known Chad Wolf personally for many years, and I'm trying my best amidst being out there to focus my attention on the president. And because he's created this culture in Washington that's just a backstabbing, name-calling, ugly, ugly culture. So I won't comment on Chad specifically, but what I will say is this. That's a very hard job. But the White House is driving the show when it comes to issues like immigration, but also the use of DHS for political purposes. And ultimately, the accountability is with the president. Am I alarmed about it? Absolutely. I think some of the rhetoric we're seeing coming out of the White House and that department right now is very concerning, and we're entering uncharted territory. DHS is being exploited and abused for political purposes, and I'm willing to go as far as to say the president is abusing the powers of that department to benefit him in his reelection effort. Okay, again, I'm not a political hack. I'm not a guy who's ever worked on a campaign full time. I'm just a guy who's worked in the national security establishment. I've seen the president do this, and I'm watching him now continue to take this department that was built out of the rubble of 9/11 and try to use it for his own personal political benefit to get reelected. I can't even believe you and I are having to have that conversation, but it's a conversation that has to be had, and it's not just me. A number of former senior DHS officials have left and joined me in endorsing that sentiment. And there are others you're going to see in the coming weeks come out and do the same that have worked in these spaces. And I think will testify to the same feeling about what the president's doing. It's very concerning. And I would urge people who are serving around the president right now to speak up, or if they can't convince him to do the right thing, it's maybe time to leave their jobs.
Oh, that's interesting. Have you heard from people inside saying, go Miles go, thank you for doing this, while they're staying inside?
An hour and a half ago, and many more points in between. An hour and a half ago, I communicated securely with someone in the administration at a relatively high level, someone who sees the president intermittently, who just said, "I wish I could be doing the same thing right now." My response was, "You can be, and
Right.
let's talk about it." But here's the thing: he has made people so scared. He's made them so scared to come out and speak their minds because he's got this vice-like grip on the party. He will ruin your career and your life and your future in the GOP, that people are spooked and they're worried about their families and they're worried about their job prospects. What I would say to these people is this: yes, those things are real and it's weighty and they'll come after you. But the weight off of your conscience outweighs those costs in spades. But it's not easy. I mean, look, I'll tell you this, Jessica. I've been told by 5 different sources in the administration, not only that they're actively trying to dig into my professional time while I was there to see if they can find anything to rub dirt on me, but I just found out within the past week that they're digging into my personal life to see if they can find anything in my relationships and personal life that might be damning that they could give to a reporter. All right, I'm a tough guy. I got thick skin. I'll be okay. They can throw anything at me. But those types of intimidation techniques are what they're hoping will keep other people from speaking out. My message to those people is, we won't be muzzled. I won't be muzzled. We're starting an organization called Repair that Republicans can come join and speak out, and we will protect you. We'll help people get their message out, and we'll look out for them. So that's what we have to do. And I can't believe in the United States in 2020, that's got to be something we do to speak out against our president, but it's the reality.
Miles, I'm so glad that you're forthcoming about this, because one of the challenges I experience is a lot of people are tuning into politics for the first time right now in the Trump administration, and they hear us say these things that are quite extreme. The president and the White House threatened to look into me, that, he's abusing his power, and they think maybe this is what politics is like. But you worked on Capitol Hill for years. You worked with difficult principles. Did you ever experience anything that approached this until you encountered President Trump?
No, no. And again, I've got to emphasize to the skeptical person, this isn't some cynical ploy. I went in really, really hoping I would spend a few years in having the time of my life, helping do great things, and helping a president succeed. It's just not how it panned out. But I've never met, not only in government, but in business. I've spent a lot of time with Fortune 500 leaders of major companies and organizations, heads of state in other countries. I've never met a person like this. I've never met an individual this undisciplined up close. I mean, I'm literally mean like moment to moment, like, sir, can you focus? Like, here is a photo. You will need to remember it has an impact on your job. By the way, lives may be on the line. He can't focus on that. It's disturbing beyond explanation. But we've heard so much hyperbole coming out of this administration. It's really hard for people to wrap their heads around it. But it's very, very real. And we have a very real choice to make in November. And it's not just about who's going to serve in that highest office. That person's a reflection of us. So the question is really, who do we want to be? Do we want to be this for another 4 years? Do we want to be mean tweeting every morning, afraid to go to Thanksgiving dinner with our relatives because of our political differences? Is that what we want to be? If so, we deserve it. If so, we deserve it and 4 more years of Trump. If we don't, and if we're all a little sickened by this, regardless of whether we're Democrats or Republicans, then maybe we deserve something a little bit different. And I hope that's why people will support Biden, even if they don't agree with his policies.
The president has recently deployed DHS agents as effectively law enforcement in cities across the US. They've come from the Federal Protective Service, I think, and from some sort of SWAT unit affiliated with the Border Patrol. There's all sorts of questions about the legality of that or how appropriate it is. Do you have any fear that he could deploy troops like that or forces like that around the election?
Yeah, this is one of those places where I think it's really important to call the balls and strikes. So on the one hand, the Department of Homeland Security has a very clear mission to protect federal buildings. They're required to do that. There's a whole agency focused on it, as you noted. So in Portland, I think what a lot of people misunderstood at first is really the only DHS role there was to protect a federal courthouse and to keep it from being burned down and destroyed. And that got conflated with a lot of other things that other law enforcement agencies were doing in the area, but DHS was focused on that. However, in the president's mind, I don't think he even understood that that was the department's sole responsibility. And I've experienced this with the president, where we'll explain something to him and say, sir, this is the limits of our authority. He doesn't understand it. He sees the images on TV. And I genuinely think the president believes DHS is his personal Gestapo police force that he can deploy at will. And are they considering that? Well, look, as recently as today, you had Acting Secretary Wolf, I think it was yesterday, send a letter to the mayor of Portland and said, look, if you don't get your house in order, we're going to start deploying federal law enforcement officers out there, whether you like it or not. That's maybe something a commander in chief can say, maybe something an attorney general, who's the nation's chief law enforcement officer, might be able to threaten. Those things are still questionable in and of themselves, but I don't know any precedent for the head of the Department of Homeland Security to threaten to send law enforcement officers in beyond the scope of their traditional mission of protecting federal buildings. That worries me a lot. I think that, again, we're in uncharted territory here, and the institutions that we rely on as Americans, that we're paying, by the way, to protect us, might instead be working against the public interest.
I'm going to put two questions together because we're short on time. I want to get through a lot. You've said that you are proud of or impressed with the work DHS has done to secure the upcoming election. I'm curious if you think that the election is, that our systems are hardened and that our voting machines are secure from any interference. And in addition, are you confident that the president would accept the results of the election were he to lose?
And that's the operative word, the president. But I'll start on the first part. Look, there's extraordinary public servants who've done yeoman's work since 2016 to secure our elections. Chris Krebs, who runs our domestic cybersecurity agency, Chris Wray, who runs the FBI, Dan Coates, who recently left as director of national intelligence, the head of the NSA, General Nakasone, many others have put in place some extraordinary mechanisms to make sure that the bad guys can't meddle. And if they do, that they get punished. Some of that won't be able to be talked about for many years, but we're in much better shape in that regard than we were in 2016. And I think Americans should be really proud of what's happened there. What they shouldn't be proud about and should be concerned about is the man at the top who oversees it all is totally not bought into it, is disinterested, doesn't care, and at worst, may actually embrace some of the foreign meddling done by countries like Russia and China and others. So the bureaucracy in our government can do everything possible to protect us against election meddling. And they're prepared for almost every scenario. The scenario they're not prepared for is that their boss might say, no, don't worry about it. This is good. This is good meddling because it benefits me. What do they do then? What do? Do they counter message their boss? Do they punish the president? Do they deter the president? All the tools they would have to go after foreign bad guys, they can't use against their boss. He's the commander in chief. That's the question they haven't answered. And when they get into that situation, I don't know what they're going to do.
Would we at least know? Is there any obligation to inform the American public that there's been evidence of interference if that's happened?
So I'm very, very convinced. One, if we see nation state meddling, that the patriots in our government, even if the president doesn't want them to, they will say what's happening. They will tell the Congress, they'll tell the American people. Two, I think if the president undermines the legitimacy of this election, we're going to see it. And it's going to be very visible. And he's already started to lay some of that groundwork. I mean, we've just seen him this week suggesting that secret people are pulling the strings in the Biden campaign, and people in, thugs in dark clothing are flying in on airplanes into Washington, D.C. to upset. I mean, these conspiracy theories are his way of, if he loses the election on November 3rd, saying, I told you there were secret forces conspiring against me. I'm the legitimate victor. I should have won. That in and of itself is election interference. That in and of itself could cause nationwide civil unrest. And I think it's incumbent on politicians, especially those in the president's party, to lay out red lines now and say, it's unacceptable for Donald Trump to do this. And if he does, we will support his removal from office.
Finally, you've been critical of others in the party for not speaking out. Trump has a kind of cult of personality with a lot of elected members. If the president loses, do you think Republicans would sort of be free, those who are critical of him, to actually speak and take action? And what do you imagine is the impact on America if Trump is reelected?
Well, on the first one, I'll say this. If the president does what I just said he might do, try to claim that he was the legitimate victor if he loses, that is the perfect opportunity for any Republican politician, even the ones who've sold their souls to do anything Trump wants for the past few years, that's their opportunity to step forward and say, no, this is wrong. We won't accept a president trying to prohibit a peaceful transfer of power. That is their opportunity to step up regain their conscience, maybe regain some of their moral standing. I hope we don't end up in that situation. I genuinely hope we don't. I hope the president exercises discipline, but we just can't come to expect that with him. On the second point, look, if we face a second Trump term, I've said this at least about the Republican Party. The GOP right now is on life support as a party. If the president wins, it will be on hospice care. It will be dying. And I don't know if the party is salvageable after that. But I'm much more worried about the country than just this party that I've been a part of for my career. And Trump in a second term will feel emboldened. And any impulse he's had to do something that perhaps borders on illegality and impropriety will be an impulse that he pursues because he will feel unencumbered. That's not just speculation. Anytime Donald Trump has felt like he can run through a wall or a barrier of ethics or morality or legality, he'll do it. And in a second term, he won't feel like he's got to be accountable to voters. And the people around him have said as much to me, have said, look, we're going to implement shock and awe in a second term, things that the voters maybe wouldn't approve of if they knew about it before the election, but we'll be able to do what we want. That's not how government should work. That's not how people who serve the American people should even talk.
But worse, it sounds like, sounds like a slide into fascism. That's not democracy.
Jessica, what's funny is for so many years, I resisted this talk about authoritarian impulses and fascism because it's the United States, right? And I spent a lot of time in the administration thinking, this is the left and Democrats are losing their minds and they're saying things they shouldn't. I've come around. His impulses are that. There's a reason Donald Trump is so attracted to autocrats and dictators around the world. It's the reason he wants them to be America's best friends and not our longtime allies, because he looks in the mirror and he sees himself being like them. And you can look back at his record and his comments. The president loves the idea of an unfettered executive, unfettered power in the seat of government, and the abolishment of term limits. He's even waxed poetic about the president of China and how he may be indefinitely the ruler, President Xi. We should be worried about that, and we should be more than worried about that for the right now. It's for the later, it's the next generation and our children. What kind of precedent will that set for how we treat rules and norms and the rule of law in general? And I think that is something to fear, and it's also something people need to have in mind on November 3rd.
Miles, sobering conversation. I'm grateful for your clarity.
Jessica, it's been a pleasure. Anytime, would love to chat with you.